Why be on the midterms? Because you can't predict anything for the next 2 years?
Well,
and if you get that far, do you ever turn it back?
Fittingly, that embassy site used to be a Ford dealership, so it's very fitting that that's where they built their embassy. As we have a giant fight, ages ago.
Wow,
had a giant fight over cars in particular. Carney is bracing for a long winter, basically, and doesn't know how long this will last. They see, I'm told, no sign of talks resuming soon. Some people thought that him setting the tariffs on September 8th was some kind of overtime period. That's not how they see it. Ambassador Wiseman telling me that it shouldn't be interpreted that way. But even before the midterms, they see low chance of resuming these talks. President Trump, of course, today announcing these additional tariffs, including one on steel that's the current rate on steel. So a bit of a screw up there by the president. Signals that this could drag on for some time. And we'll see. I mean, the dust is settling on this collapse, right? I mean, as of Friday, they thought they were headed towards a deal. There's lots of reporting. We can talk about what happened since then, but it does not look like Humpty Dumpty will be sort of pieced together in the coming days. We just don't know.
Is the administration surprised on the calling of bluffs?
I think,
or the I'll meet you and raise you? Maybe it's not a bluff.
I think it's a tale of two countries in the telling of it. For the Canadians, they are saying that the top line agreements that they had in conversations, much like the one you and I are having, when put into text form, consistently were erring on what they thought was not the deal. It was to the American benefit, to the American benefit, to the American benefit. So they thought that they were getting misled. Maybe, that's maybe too strong a word. That the stuff that was showing up on paper was not their understanding of the verbal deals that they were reaching. The Americans thought the Canadians were making last-minute demands. Let's also note here that there are dueling sort of parts of the American system here, right? Dominic LeBlanc, the Canadian minister, can come down and speak for Mark Carney, as does Mark Wiseman, who not only is U.S. ambassador, but is a close friend of Carney. And so that's not the case where Jameson Greer and Howard Lutnick are each kind of over their own domain here. Carney has sort of sidestepped the question about how big a factor that played. But certainly they've been talking past each other since Friday, and it seems like they were talking past each other on Friday. You know, Lutnick in the past has sort of bragged about Trump being the closer, as he's called him, on trade deals. That sort of raises the question of whether there were last-minute demands put in. Greer poured some cold water on some of it today on that French issue that you alluded to. Great job, Joe, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's you. Very happy.
French
saying that the French language issue that Carney has sort of leaned into politically, publicly, in Greer's estimation, is overblown. What he says they're talking about is requirements for Netflix and other U.S.-based streamers to contribute revenue towards developing French language content. Which would be probably more on the minor end of the disputes. Anyway, here we are. But for now, those tariffs have gone into place. USTR has done their homework. Those tariffs are designed to pressure certain provinces over other provinces, including ones that have the booze bans that has so enraged the president. We're going to see whether Mark Carney's retaliation, he hasn't specifically announced it yet, does take similar steps to target both some of the Senate seats that the president is worried about and the House seats that he's worried about. So we'll see.
Doug Ford is talking again about turning the lights out.
I don't know that I can repeat on air what Doug Ford said, but he invited the president to kiss him somewhere.
Okay, all right, fine.
I guess, let's say that.
But he says, we'll cut the power, we'll cut the electricity.
Correct, and this enraged the president the last time. I'll note that right now, Canada is holding off some of the more nuclear options. That would be resuming Doug Ford and the Ontario government's plan of either curtailing or taxing or halting electricity exports to the Midwest. That's right. And also any sort of export controls, whether it be on oil or other products, or export tariffs. We don't know. Carney has backed away from that. That is not where he's gone yet, but he presumably could still move there if they wanted to. So the Canadians are not going to full war footing yet, but whether they do remains to be seen. Joe, as you know, the politics of this are very different in both countries, right? Trump is not popular right now. He's outcry even from within his party about some of his trade measures.
This is hugely important.
Every time he takes a swipe at Canada, Carney's poll numbers tick up again.
He's like in the 70s or something.
It's in a multi-party, it's like not a two-party system.
Unheard of.
It's very strong. So Carney is on very strong political footing. There are interesting divides. We could do a whole show about sort of baby boomers have one view and younger people have another view. But essentially, Carney's base is behind him, lockstep, and that gives him the footing to sort of brace for a long war.
We heard from Chrystia Freeland over the weekend on Bloomberg this weekend. If you're not watching or listening to the weekend show, you're wasting your weekend. And to her point, on this as a zero-sum game, listen to what she told us on Bloomberg.
We don't see this as a zero-sum game. We don't see this as about dominance and submission. We think we can reach a deal that works for both parties. I think at heart, that is not President Trump's view. And that is a real problem. And it's a problem not only for Canada, it's a problem for the United States.
So to what extent could we see self-inflicted wounds, for instance, when it comes to automakers? The stocks are down. Should they be? What does this mean for Ford, GM?
Well, one of the divides, you mentioned Ford and GM, one of the divides was the Canadians believe that the tariff relief should be extended to medium and heavy duty vehicles. That's aimed in basically at 2 plants in Canada, if I'm off the top of my head is correct, one GM plant, one Ford plant. In other words, Ford and GM are being pressured by the Trump administration to, basically make those plants non-viable with the, I assume, gambit that they would then have to reshore back to the American side of the border. So right now, where the tariffs are standing, which is 25% on all vehicles on non-U.S. content, basically it's about half that. Canada has like an okay deal, but the industry is more or less on life support. If it was doubled to 50%, which again presumably would again not touch U.S. contents, would be in effect about 25%. That would be very bad, even with the Canadian dollar low where it is right now, and would put them at quite a disadvantage against Japan and Korea, who have a 15% rate but don't have to do any of the other stuff that USMCA makers have to do, like hire a certain number of high-wage workers and whatnot. So it's a tricky one right now. It's sort of an existential question about the future of the Canadian auto industry, and that's why both Premier Ford, whose province hosts Canada's auto industry, and the Prime Minister are digging in so heavily on this. It's a tough one, Joe.
Wow, okay. Was there a moment, did you get a phone call where everyone's walking away from the table? At what point was it clear that this had gone south?
Let's shout out the Customs and Border Protection agency in the U.S. They broke the news.
Yeah,
they put the formal notice out at about 11:30 at night saying these tariffs are kicking in. That was the first true sign we got. Jameson Greer had a statement. A U.S. official briefed reporters. We heard from the Canadians on Saturday. I really can't stress enough, though, that this really did collapse in the final hours. There was reporting even 2 or 3 hours before that things were moving in a positive direction. Everything we've heard since is that was the case, and it just went off the rails. That 50% that kicked in, that is targeted, as I said, to a few provinces. So again, going after Ford and GM, going after provinces that have banned booze. The U.S. is picking its mark. It's on 20 billion of goods. That's not huge. And heading into this, Canada had one of the lowest effective tariff rates, the lowest in the G7, in fact, and one of the lowest in the G20 for U.S. tariffs. The U.S. is tariffing everyone, but it has enraged the Canadians in particular when combined with President Trump's comments about the 51st state. And I think that's what is really influencing the political landscape. But for particular sectors who are waking up today in Canada, to an additional 50% tariff on what they sell to the States, which, of course, Canada sells a lot of stuff to the States, just as the States sells a lot of stuff to Canada. There's a reason they're mad about the boycotts and the booze. It shouldn't be understated the effect that'll have on them. It could be presumably existential for some, life or death for many of these businesses. And Carney has acknowledged this publicly, saying that they don't want to do this, but he feels he has no choice. Carney and Freeland have been a bit at odds publicly. It's interesting to play her clip. So, the former negotiator and the current Prime Minister have slightly different views as to where they are, but as of now, they're singing the same song sheet.